It begins not with a dramatic cultural clash, but with a quiet confusion. To the American eye, Canada seems familiar, the same language, similar cities, recognizable brands. There are no immediate signs of rupture, and yet, within weeks of arrival, something feels off-kilter. Not wrong, just different. Time moves differently. Conversations unfold at a different rhythm. Social life doesn't orbit the same urgency. It's this subtle displacement, not visible, but atmospheric, that catches many Americans off guard. The first impressions are deceptively gentle. Streets are clean, people polite, institutions orderly. The cultural architecture appears intact. But it's in the everyday interactions, in the grocery store, on the sidewalk, during a work meeting, where the contrast begins to surface. Canadians speak softly, pause longer, yield more space. There's less performance in their friendliness and more steadiness in their tone. The American reflects to fill silences, to make an impression, to assert warmth with energy, begins to feel oversized. Many Americans describe a sense of emotional deceleration. In social spaces, Canadians tend to calibrate their expressions with care, often opting for understatement. Enthusiasm is present, but muted. There is less pressure to be dynamic, and more comfort in neutrality. Compliments are subtle, jokes are dry. Even customer service, while courteous, doesn't carry the same theatrical cheer. For those accustomed to immediate rapport and expressive engagement, this can feel oddly isolating, like everyone speaking the same language, but with a different emotional grammar. Beneath this lies a deeper cultural orientation. Canadian society prizes consensus, modesty, and social cohesion. These values translate into a public demeanor that avoids extremes. While American culture often celebrates boldness, charisma, and the right to stand out, Canadian social life leans toward harmony and consideration. The national instinct is to smooth the edges, not sharpen them. This doesn't just influence interpersonal behavior, it shapes systems, policies, and even urban life. The pace of Canadian cities tends to be slower, more measured. There's a lack of urgency in the air, not in a way that signals laziness, but in a way that resists constant acceleration. Many Americans, especially those from the East Coast or large metropolitan areas, find this unsettling. The drive to optimize, to move fast and break things, doesn't find the same cultural traction. Even the ambition feels quieter, less about domination, more about contribution. In workplaces, assertiveness is tempered by collegiality. Meetings prioritize inclusiveness over speed. Decisions are often collaborative, even when consensus takes time. Social trust also operates differently. In Canada, there's a baseline expectation that systems work, that healthcare is accessible, that government is competent, that public services function. This trust creates a cultural backdrop of stability that feels foreign to many Americans, who often navigate institutions with skepticism. As a result, Canadians tend to approach collective issues with less cynicism and more patience. The absence of defensive individualism, so common in the American psyche, alters the emotional atmosphere in surprising ways. These undercurrents affect daily rituals in quiet but powerful ways. The way people wait in line, the way drivers interact at four-way stops, the way public disputes are handled, often with calmness, even when disagreement runs deep. For Americans used to a more confrontational or expressive norm, these moments can feel either refreshingly civil or emotionally distant. The cultural codes aren't necessarily more polite, they're just written in a different dialect of politeness. The adjustment deepens when Americans begin to navigate the subtler dimensions of belonging. In Canada, social integration often unfolds more slowly, not because people are unkind, but because interpersonal boundaries are more defined. Friendships tend to build gradually, through shared experiences rather than instant rapport. This contrasts with the American habit of quick inclusion, where warmth is often offered early and generously. In Canada, emotional access is earned over time, and this can leave new arrivals feeling unsure of their social footing. Work culture reinforces this slow build dynamic. While American offices often reward speed, initiative, and visibility, Canadian workplaces place a higher premium on humility, teamwork, and deference to process. Self-promotion is rare and can even be seen as distasteful. Meetings are more democratic, with an unspoken etiquette that discourages dominating the room. The cultural value placed on balance over boldness means that ambition must often be camouflaged in diplomacy. For Americans used to directness and drive, this can create a sense of being muted, as if the volume of their professional identity has been turned down. Even in leisure, this restraint continues. Canadian social life is not devoid of joy, but it tends to be quieter, more grounded in routines and nature than spectacle or spontaneity. Weekends are often spent outdoors, not necessarily in grand adventures, but in habitual acts of connection with place. Hikes, lakeside visits, communal gardening. The Canadian relationship to land is practical, humble, and deeply embedded in lifestyle. Many Americans, especially those from urban or suburban settings, find this attachment both beautiful and foreign, a lifestyle where the outdoors in an escape. But a rhythm. Civic life echoes this subtle collectivism. There's a higher baseline of civic-mindedness, not loudly proclaimed, but quietly practiced. Canadians tend to trust each other in small ways, leaving doors unlocked in rural areas, returning lost items, queuing without enforcement. These micro acts of mutual respect create an invisible infrastructure of daily life that feels strikingly different. Americans, shaped by a more individualistic ethos, often feel surprised by the ease with which Canadians defer to the group, not out of obligation, but from a quiet ethic of consideration. This ethic extends to discourse. Political conversations in Canada are often marked by caution and a preference for middle ground. The ideological spectrum exists, but the social norm leans toward moderation. Outrage is less socially rewarded. Identity, while important, is discussed with a different cadence, less declarative, more contextual. For Americans, whose cultural DNA includes a history of protest, self-expression, and ideological clarity, this can feel like a muffling of voice. But for Canadians, the goal is not to silence, it is to keep the social fabric intact, to make room for complexity without combustion. There is also a national comfort with ambiguity. Answers don't always come quickly. Policies are often the result of long deliberation. Even public messaging can feel vague, wrapped in caveats and qualifications. Americans, trained to value clarity and decisive action, sometimes interpret this as indecision. But in Canada, it reflects a cultural hesitance to impose, a belief that shared solutions require careful calibration, not just strong leadership. Over time, these differences begin to reshape perception. The initial sense of sameness fades, revealing a culture that is not just a quieter version of the United States, but a distinct ecosystem with its own emotional climate. It's not just that Canada moves slower, it's that it moves differently. The systems are less reactive, the people less performative, the public square less theatrical. Life is not lived in pursuit of acceleration, but in careful maintenance of balance. For many Americans, this shift is initially disorienting, but it also invites reflection. The absence of constant assertion makes space for listening. The lack of pressure to impress allows for quieter forms of connection. The muted civic temperature opens room for measured thought. In this space, identity begins to soften, not to disappear, but to become more relational. The question becomes less about what one stands for and more about how one moves among others. Over time, many Americans experience a quiet inner shift. The constant need for validation slowly fades. In Canada, recognition is rarely loud, it's implied. This creates an emotional stillness. For some, it feels grounding. For others, strangely muted. Yet within that stillness lies another kind of connection, based on reliability, thoughtfulness, and calm participation. The sharp edge of self-presentation softens. The urgency to stand out gives way to a desire to simply belong. Time feels different, less like a resource and more like open space. Conversations are gentler. Pauses are allowed. Conflict is diffused. Warmth isn't absent, it's just quieter, steadier. In workplaces, success is often shared rather than showcased. Ambition doesn't vanish, but it wears a softer tone. Assertiveness is shaped by cooperation, and leadership by listening. These subtle norms begin to rewire professional instincts, replacing competition with collaboration. Socially, relationships develop through repeated presence rather than intensity. Trust builds in small, consistent gestures, a neighbor helping without being asked, a colleague respecting boundaries, a friend showing up without a performance of affection. Emotional depth comes not from intensity, but from steadiness. Gradually, American identity doesn't disappear, it adapts. It learns to move within a rhythm where connection grows slowly, and respect often speaks through silence. In the end, the hardest part isn't adjusting to something new, it's unlearning what once felt necessary. Canada doesn't demand transformation, it simply creates space for it.